Welcome to How to Be a Person, a podcast about life with me, your host, Giuliano Grimaudo. Susan, how's it going?
Hi there. Thanks for
Thanks so much
having
for
me.
coming on. Yeah, I appreciate you. So, since this is the first time we're meeting and probably, the first time my listeners will be hearing from you, you want to let us know a little bit about who you are and what you're about?
Sure, absolutely. Where do I start? Well, I think the main reason I'm on this podcast is I wrote a book,
Okay.
and it took me 4.5 years to write it. It was my personal memoir
Mm,
called The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. So, um, I am a trauma resiliency coach.
okay.
Found that purpose through writing the book and
Mm,
through conversations with people. Um, and I speak on stages as well. So that's a little bit about me. Also, currently, I'm a realtor in the Denver metro area of Colorado.
okay.
Um, but my main purpose is to help others and help and guide them once they've gone through some kind of therapy for trauma. Um, the issue is that yes, you get the help from the people, you know, to work through the past.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get to a certain place, that's where I kind of come in and
Mm-hmm.
move you forward. So this all came about, and I'll tell you in a roundabout way because it's very it's my story is got a lot of components to
Okay.
it. Um, so in 1985, I was 17 years old.
Okay.
My dad was an LAPD, a Los Angeles police detective. He was a lead detective on a case that he was testifying in on Halloween of 1985. And uh, I had a 6 year old. He was 6 years old at the time, my brother. Um, and that morning, my dad and I had a conversation about me going to a party that night because I was, again, a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go to a party with my boyfriend and my friends. And my dad said no. It was a school night. And having a cop father, anyone who's had a cop father will understand that. So the plan was that I would come home from school. My mom would come home from work. My dad would go to the school and pick up my brother from school and then come home. And at that point, I would schmooze my parents into allowing me to go to this party. So I came home, I cleaned the entire house. And just to impress them.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom came home and she was taking her costume off. And the phone rang. And I thought for sure it was for me. So I ran to it. And this was the day where phones were still attached to the wall.
Sure.
So I picked it up and it wasn't for me. Unfortunately, it was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And at
At
that
this,
point,
this was someone from the school called.
yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
And this is how we were notified. And
Wow.
my mom came around the corner. I handed her the phone immediately. And I watched her. I just watched her demeanor. I watched her body language.
Yeah.
And I could tell just by her body language that it was bad.
Yeah.
And so she got off the phone and said, "We're going to the school." So we drove to the school, and the way that the school is set up is there is a parking lot right in the middle. And all the kids, since this was past 5 o'clock, all the kids in the after school care got out on the back side of the school. So when we parked, that's where we headed. As we started to approach the street, we could see like it was nighttime but it looked like daylight because there were so many lights of the police cars up and down the street. And there was an ambulance sitting in the middle of the street as well. My mom and I caught with our side eye, we saw my dad's truck. So we started running towards it. And as we got closer, we saw the glass on the ground and rounded the corner, and there he was, partially covered up. And at that point, I watched my mom drop to her knees and start screaming. And being a kid, I didn't understand or comprehend what I was seeing. So what I ended up doing is hyper focusing on the ambulance. And I kept thinking to myself, why isn't anyone helping? Why isn't anybody helping him? It wasn't too long. 2 officers grabbed us and escorted us into the school. We went into one of the offices, and they escorted her away, my mom, probably to ask her questions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sat down in the office and just trying to comprehend everything that I was feeling, and still not connecting the dots. I was still not there yet.
Yeah.
And I heard 2 women talking that worked at the school, and the one lady said that Mr. Williams was deceased.
Mm.
And at that point, my world cracked.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to run out of there. I wanted to run as far as I could from this situation. But my legs like wouldn't move. I felt like my whole body was made of cement. And a couple of minutes later, my mom came to me and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And I knew in that moment that even though I wanted to run away, that I needed my family unit. Like, I didn't know where my brother was at the time. I didn't know if he was hurt. I didn't know
Yeah.
any information. So I
For
just
sorry,
wanted,
just for clarity for me, your dad went to the school to pick up your brother, correct?
yes,
And that's when this happened. Okay, gotcha.
yes.
And that's why you didn't know where your brother was, what was going
Yeah,
on
I
with
had
him
no
even.
idea
Okay.
where they took him.
Okay.
I didn't know if he was sitting in a hospital. Like, I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea. And very confused. It was very chaotic that night. It was
Mm-hmm.
very chaotic that night. And but my mom sent me with a neighbor, and that was really difficult on top of what I had just witnessed,
Sure.
because at that moment I kind of had this sense that I wasn't important in the scenario. And I felt really bad for the neighbor. I mean, she had known my parents for years, and I
Mm-hmm.
had been really good friends with their daughter when we were young.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was trying to, as an adult, trying to process everything that was going on. And here she had his daughter that was beside herself. Like, I was inconsolable. All I wanted at that point was my boyfriend. And we had only been dating 3 months when this happened. And so when she called him at work, she didn't tell him a whole lot. So when he arrived I opened the door and he was like, "Get your purse, let's go. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother?" Like, all the normal questions. And I couldn't spit out the words. I couldn't say it, because if I said it, it was real.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until he was just completely persistent about me leaving, I finally blurted it out that he was gone. And he said, "What do you mean he's gone?" And I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital." And then I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend fall to his knees and sob. And here we were, 2 kids, trying to navigate all of this, trying to figure out what our next steps were. We had no
Yeah.
idea. My neighborhood was something I had never seen before. My neighborhood was very quiet prior to this, and now it was lined with police cars. There were helicopters overhead. Unbeknownst to us, we too were the target. And so,
Mm.
excuse me. So and I didn't know that. I just knew that all of these police officers had converged,
Yeah.
um, and the media. This was a huge story at
Sure.
the time. But in 1985, there was no talk about mental health,
Yeah.
and there were no resources for kids. Um, and when I finally did go home that night, like there were people that I had no idea who they were in my living room and in my kitchen.
Mm.
And I know now that they were dignitaries and advocacy groups and whatever, but um, I just ran into my room and I hid with my
Yeah.
boyfriend. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know anymore. Like I just hid. And when my boyfriend left, I just stayed in my room the whole time. I did not want to acknowledge anything. I didn't see my brother until the following day around late morning. I had heard him crying in the middle of the night, but I couldn't do anything. Like there was nothing left of me. And I assumed my mom would be the one, since he was 6, that she would be the one to console him and be there for him. And um, they didn't catch the people that were involved. There were multiple people involved in the planning and killing of my dad. So it took them 6 days. I had that police presence for 6 days.
Wow.
Front yard, backyard. I had bodyguards, and it was crazy. I went from having this normal teenage life
Hmm.
to something I wouldn't wish on anyone.
Yeah.
Um, if I poked my head out the door or anything, the media was like there. I couldn't grieve privately. There was always either a camera in my face or
Hmm.
someone in my face. It was just hard. Um, and after everything went away, as it normally does, um, my mom came to me. And at that point, I didn't know all of the things that I was dealing with. I was not sleeping. I lived in a fog. I I had anxiety because my dad was my security. He was my protector, and now he was gone. Um, I didn't have a great relationship with my mom.
Mm.
Uh, it was a little toxic, and he was always the go between, the voice of reason, and that was gone. And so, trying to process how I was going to move forward
Mm.
was difficult. And so I had panic attacks at night, especially deep depression, suicidal ideation. I just didn't know what it was called.
Yeah.
I just knew I wanted to be with my dad. I didn't want to feel this way.
Hmm.
And so when my mom came to me and said LAPD wants to pay for all of us to go to therapy, I was like, actually, I was voluntold. uh,
It was what you said?
I was voluntold. I was,
Oh,
you
I
are
see.
going to therapy.
Voluntold. Gotcha.
And so I was like, oh, okay. Cause at that point, like you could just push me in a direction and that's the
Yeah.
direction I went. I didn't
Yeah.
know how to advocate for myself.
Yeah.
And I definitely didn't know how to verbalize all the things that were going on with me.
Hmm.
So I went, even though in my mind, my young mind, I thought, oh gosh, if you go to a therapist, you're crazy. So I must be nuts. So I went, and in hindsight now, I know that this gentleman that I went and saw was not trauma competent. There wasn't a whole lot known back there
Yeah.
anyways, but he never asked me any questions that alluded to, how that night made me feel or anything.
Wow.
I don't think he wanted to dip his toes,
Oh God.
to be honest.
Yeah.
So like all of our therapy sessions were very shallow. They were very like general, like relationship with my mother, my brother, my
Mm.
boyfriend in school. That's it. And
Wow.
every week I would just be like, today's the day. Today's the day. He's going to help me. He's going to make me feel better.
Mm.
And it never happened. And after a year of seeing him, he said, "You're a well-rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore."
Wow.
And I literally walked out of that office thinking, oh my God, I've broken. I'm broken. I'm crazy. A professional can't help me. I'm always going to feel like this and be this way. So I better figure out how to do this on my own. And at that point, all I could do is hide behind a persona. And so people would say to me, "Oh, you're so strong. You're so brave. You're so this, you're so that." And that was, I created an emotional mask with that persona.
Mm.
That's what I hid behind. And a lot of people do it, you know. Um, to me, I thought that was my superhero power, right? I could just
Mm.
hide behind it. Nobody on the outside could see all the turmoil that was going on with me.
Mm.
I could pretend I was fine. I hate that word. Fine. But we all do it. You know, it's a human thing. We all do it. Like, "Oh, how are you?" "I'm fine." And you're not, you know. And I catch people all the time when they say that to me, just because I've lived it. And I lived like that for 14 years in flight or flight.
Yeah.
And looking back, I realized that I kept myself from having more incredible relationships with people.
Mm.
I didn't let people in. I didn't let them help me. If they came to me and said, "How can I support you?" I would push them away. I would say, "You know what? This is not your burden. This is mine. Like,
Mm.
I'm not putting this on you," kind of thing. And that's not healthy either, right? But that was my coping mechanism. That's what I did. And not healthy. Just didn't know it at the time. And um, soon enough, I married the boyfriend. We're still together.
Really,
Um,
the boyfriend you had when this
yeah,
happened.
yeah.
Wow.
I married him. We had 2 kids, and at that point, we decided that's it. We're out of California. I no longer wanted to live with looking behind my shoulder all the time.
Mm.
Um, People knowing who I was. I wanted to go somewhere where nobody knew me and nobody knew my past and nobody knew
Mm.
anything
Okay.
at that point. Um, and so I moved, and we moved here in 97, April of 97. I was working as a hairdresser at the time. And I went to work for a salon that was by Littleton, Colorado. Um, April 20th of 1999. I was working that day, and I took a break from my clients, went into the back room and popped on their little TV back there, and up popped the coverage of the Columbine shootings. And they were live. And I had a visceral reaction.
Wow.
I started having flashbacks. I started having a panic attack.
Mm.
I turned white as a ghost. Now, remember, none of my colleagues knew anything.
Yeah.
So they're watching me go through all of this, and they're totally confused because they're like, "You're too young to have kids that go there. We know that you don't live in that area. So what is happening to you?"
Yeah. What is this reaction? Yeah.
And I had no idea because remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life.
You're
So
well rounded. You're
I was
perfect.
well rounded. I
Yeah.
was fine. And I wasn't fine.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt myself starting to spiral, and I thought, "Oh, mask, boom, back on."
Mm.
And I went out, finished my day. Everybody around me was in tears, were angry, had all
Mm.
of these emotions. And I was like, "Nope, this isn't going to affect me." And I finished my day. And when I walked out the door to get in my car and drive home, everything came flooding back.
Mm.
And I started having the suicidal ideation again. I felt the depression. I felt the darkness. I felt everything. And I went home and I really tried to like put on a brave face, especially with kids. And they were small at the time. And by the second day, my husband was like, oh no, He saw me. He saw me, and he is a smart man, and he saw me spiraling. And so he met me at the door and he said, you have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital. And at that point, I was scared because I knew that there was a part of me that just wanted to leave this world and stop hurting.
Yeah.
But then there was a part of me that had two babies that needed me.
Mm.
And I couldn't leave them. So I put the white flag up. I was like, all right, I'll go. And I made an appointment, saw a physician. He put me on antidepressants immediately because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I said, I actually started laughing. And I said, I tried this before. It didn't work. So what makes you think it's going to happen this time? And he looked at me and he said, honestly, you have no choice. So I said, all right, I'll go. And I made an appointment and I am so grateful that I did
Sure.
because this therapist, she specialized in severe trauma.
Mm.
She also really was knowledgeable about PTSD. And so, in talking to her in our consultation for the first 3 minutes, I described to her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with. And she looked at me and she said, Susan, everything that you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I sat back in my chair. I was like, what? I didn't go to war. What? And she said, no. She said, anyone who has gone through any type of trauma can experience PTSD. But
Mm-hmm.
what you need to understand is that PTSD doesn't just go away. You learn to manage it. And in that conversation, oh my gosh, I finally had hope.
Yeah.
I was like, I can heal from this. I can finally feel better. I was just so filled with gratitude and hope. And, and I knew just talking to her that she was well aware of how she was going to proceed with me. I felt like I could be vulnerable with her, which is the key to healing. I knew that I had a safe space with her, and it was an amazing feeling. It was something that I had not ever felt. And I felt like for the first time in my life, I can really work on me and see where it goes from there.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman also understood that I was a hot mess express. And there was a lot of different things that she was going to have to address with me. From the very get-go, she asked me, what is the one thing that you are really struggling with right now that we can address? And at that point, I was not sleeping again because every time I shut my eyes, I went to that dark place. And so she said, okay, we're going to address it. And I said, okay. And she said, have you ever journaled before? And I kind of looked at her funny. I was like, huh? And she said, journaling. She said, some people write, some people do art, some people do music. Now, some people do podcasts. But the purpose of the journaling is to get all the stuff swirling around in your head out So I said, no, I've never done anything like that. I didn't even hear about it. In fact, I thought it was kind of a little woo woo for me. And she said, I want you to try it. What's your flavor like? And I said, well, I've always written. So she said, great. Put a pad of paper and a pen right by your bed on your bedside. And before you go to bed, I just want you to write. Just whatever is in your head, you just write it on the piece of paper. I don't care about spelling. I don't care about punctuation. I don't even care if it makes sense. You just put it on the paper. And I thought, okay, I'll try it. Um, and the first night I did it, I got, probably a couple hours of sleep. And then the second night, a little bit more. And by the third night, I was sleeping like a baby.
Wow.
And I didn't want to admit it. I was like, oh, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
All I had to do was just write my thoughts.
What? And so I went and saw her the next week, and she was like, so how did it go? And I said, I've been sleeping like a baby for 4 days. And she said, great, keep doing it, And so, I mean, it was just so simple. It was just that tiny, simple thing that anyone can do,
Yeah.
anyone. That makes such a huge impact on you. And so I teach that now.
Yeah.
um, and then we moved on to the anxiety, and then and she wanted to do this in bits and pieces, and she was well, uh, like more educated, I think, for the time
Hmm.
that she was doing all of this. So she was introducing cognitive behavioral things that
Sure.
were just beginning, like the EFT tapping
Oh wow.
um, modalities. And uh, down the road, we got into EMDR. She didn't do it. She didn't, that's a specific therapist to do that. But she knew that, like, baby steps with
Sure.
me.
Sure.
Didn't want to overwhelm me. And that's what I talk about. You have to try different modalities to see what works for you, because there's not a one size fits all, right? You have to kind of make sure that it's your healing, right? So you want to make sure that it's something that really makes a difference for you. It's not the therapist's healing journey, it's yours. Um, and so that's why I talk about the vulnerability part, because I've had so many conversations with people who have said, well, I tried therapy and it didn't work. And my answer is always, you haven't found your person, right? So be patient. Um, interview. Interview your therapist. Make sure that they understand the type of trauma that you're dealing with. Some therapists like lump everything together and it's very general. Well, it's not, because there's certain modalities for certain types of trauma that are going to be most helpful. And, I mean, even with sobriety, I tell this story all the time. I had this woman that I had a conversation with, and she had seen my book. Um, and she said, oh, I have, you went through so much trauma. And I've never been through that much trauma before. And I was like, okay. And so we started talking about the fact that she was headed to rehab for the third time. And she said the first two times she went for her children, like she was trying to get sober for her kids. And I said, when are you going to get sober for you? And it started this conversation. And she said, I don't know why I drink. I don't know why I behave the way I do. And so the more diving I went into it with her, she admitted to me that she grew up in an environment where it was normal to be sexually abused. Um, she lived with her mom, and her boyfriend was the abuser. and uncles, and like it was a whole family thing, family dynamic. So because she lived in that on the daily, her mindset was that wasn't trauma,
Mm.
and that's how family members show family members love. And I asked her point blank, have you ever told anyone that? And she said, no, you're the first person I've said this to. And I looked at her and I said two things. What you went through was horrific trauma. And two, it wasn't your fault. And I can understand why you drink, why you use, because you have never dealt with the reason behind it. And so she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, you tell anyone when you go to therapy, when you go to rehab, you tell everyone that story, because they will align you on with the right people, or they should align you with the right people. And once you start diving into this trauma, your sobriety is going to be easier to reach. So, too many times I feel in that field, they deal with the feelings of right now and why I want to drink.
Mm.
They don't dive, and some do, I won't say all of them, but
Sure.
some do, but some don't. They don't get to the core. They talk about the present. What's going on in the present that's making you want to, feel out of control or want to control something. And so the drinking is your control, right? But they don't really dive into what is the reasoning behind it.
Sure.
Um, and so it was a big aha moment for me, because I realized that there are people walking this planet that have had trauma but don't realize,
Mm.
and maybe they aren't, addicted to anything or whatever, but maybe they are keeping themselves from having wholehearted, loving
Yeah.
relationships and friendships with people, because there's that part of them that's been hurt. Or the opposite is, there, I hate this word trigger, but there are triggers
Sure.
that other people will act a certain way and it triggers something in them,
Mm.
which causes conflict. So there's just so many components to the healing and
Yeah.
how intense it can be.
Yeah. I think there's also like an innate, probably, like when you describe the woman who was abused, it was interesting because you asked her, have you told anybody else this? And she said no. And like on the surface, she can say, oh, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And it's like, well, that's interesting because you never told anybody about it until now. So there's a part of you that knew that this was wrong, right? That your
Yeah.
body knows that it's wrong
Yeah.
because it's causing, right? It was traumatic. And so
Right.
there's something inside you that knows it's wrong. But like you mentioned, it's about,
Yeah.
so here's what's interesting. When you mentioned the therapy, because I've heard people say the same thing right, when they talk about therapy, like, oh, therapy doesn't work. And I actually feel like just the term therapy, like the concept of therapy, um, I feel like a disservice has been done to that field
Mm-hmm.
because people view therapy as like one thing.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's so many different things.
Right.
And just like you mentioned, there's all these different modalities and also different types of therapy. I think most people don't realize that, right? They just hear therapy and they think of one thing and they go, oh,
Yeah.
that didn't work for me. So number one, I agree with you that maybe it's about, finding the right person. But
Right.
the other part of it too is just like, you don't know that it's like, I think most people aren't aware that it could be a number of different types of therapy. And so it might not
Right.
even be the person. It might just be that either they're not equipped to help you and they don't have experience in that area, or it's a different type of therapy that would
Right.
be helpful to your situation.
Exactly. That's why I tell people to interview them.
Yeah.
And it's your right. I mean, this is your journey. It's not
Sure.
anybody else's journey. And I think a lot of it too, when I talk to people, there's fear. in reaching out. There's fear in healing. It's a
Mm.
scary thing to do. I'm not going to candy coat it. It's not
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
right? However, when you do start to heal through things, you start to take your power back from that thing, that person that hurt you, right? You're telling them, you know what? I'm going to heal from this. You're not going to hurt me anymore.
Mm.
And I'm going to be able to move on with my life and have an amazing life because of this. So I think it's really important. I mean, when I talk about therapy too, I talk about, yes, it's good to see a professional 100%. Yes. Make sure you're, interviewing that person, that they understand the type of trauma,
Mm.
because sexual trauma and, the type of trauma I went through, or
Violence or something. Yeah.
violence, or car accidents, right?
Yeah.
Anything like
Sure.
that. It's very different.
Yeah.
I grew up with a narcissistic parent, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
narcissistic abuse is another one,
Yeah.
right? I'm
Totally.
working through that right now. Um, but, it's just something that you have to make sure that the person that you're dealing with knows the journey that you've got to take.
Yeah.
And knows how to answer some questions that you might have and all of that. The other thing is that, and I'm a firm believer in, coaching. I think coaching is going to take a real big spotlight
Mm.
um, coming up. I
Sure.
really feel like, especially in what's going on in the world right now, I think there's going to be a lot of people like myself coaching who can take somebody from the modalities and all of that, and move them forward into, okay, I have these tools now, so how do I utilize them in my world?
Yeah.
Like, how do I move forward in this? And for me, like, what I'm seeing a lot right now is spirituality, not religion. Spirituality is coming into play, and people
Yeah.
are starting to really dive into that.
Totally.
um if you are religious, and and you feel like maybe a spiritual person in that realm is good for you to have that kind of coaching or that kind of guidance, then so be it. Whatever it
Yeah.
is, just remember, like, you're on this planet, and it's your life, and it's your
Mm.
healing, and it's your pain,
Yeah.
and it's nobody else's. It's not your
Yeah.
partner's. It's not it's not your children's.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is, when I talked to that young lady about her sobriety, and she was saying, I want to get sober for my children. What I tried to explain her is this: once you've healed you, the people around you start to heal. So
Mm.
when I talked about the book, when I wrote the book at 50 years old. I, like, literally drew a line in the sand and said, the time is right, right? Mentally, I was in a good place. I knew that diving in and reliving and feeling all of the emotions and everything and the fear, that I would be able to move through it. Um, so I started that journey, and it was not easy, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of fear attached to it for multiple reasons. One, um, my mother and I were hanging on by a thread, and I thought, well, if this ends it, then it ends it. If it opens a conversation, I'm open. Um, Same with my husband. We've been through a lot in the almost 40 years we've been together.
Hmm.
And he too had trauma. I mean, he too was with me from that night
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
and as a young man, he didn't have the tools or
Yeah.
anything. And
Yeah.
so it caused him to have some behaviors, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, the other side of that too was that two of the men that were involved were still in prison,
Hmm.
and one of them was paroled in 2017. Um,
Which is
so
about the time you wrote your book, right?
I had that danger. I had that
Mm.
feeling of, will there be any kind of retaliation
Mm,
once I put myself back out there
I
again.
see. Yeah.
And I had to sit with that fear. But what I ended up doing is I started to realize and ask myself, what is the real purpose behind this book? Is it just for me to heal, or is it to help others heal?
Yeah.
And it was to help others heal.
Sure.
And I knew that it could probably, help my brother heal. It could um, help my husband heal. It could help my children heal. It could help law enforcement, because there's so much
Mm,
pain and so much anger still attached
yeah.
to my dad's murder. And so I felt like, okay, well, I'm going to keep moving through this fear, because those people need to hear my message. They need
Mm,
to see the resiliency, and they need to see the healing that happens.
yeah.
Um, and so anytime that fear came up, like I had those faceless people out there that would remind me that that was my purpose, and I was able to
Mm,
drive through the fear that way.
yeah.
So it is true. There are certain things that you fear, and you just got to do them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you were saying before that kind of stood out to me as well was like, so right now you're saying, right, when someone pushes, if they can push through the fear, there's like good things on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you said before was about like you can have an amazing life, not just in like, oh, I'm fine, but literally like an amazing life. And the way I see it, because I totally agree with you about coaching. I actually like I love coaching because what it feels like to me is, so this is a lot of the things, right? Like when it comes to coaching, a lot of people are critical of it because they're like, you don't have qualifications, or even if you have a certificate, that's fine, whatever. But like, there's no like formal, like anybody can call themselves a coach, basically, right? Myself included.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I look at it is, and I've described it this way. So like if you were hiking and your spouse is a few steps behind you, and you come across a spot that's kind of tricky, and you stepped on it and you go, oh, that rock is it's wiggling,
Mm-hmm.
and so you put your foot elsewhere. If you stop and turn around and you say to them, hey, I put my foot there, and it's not stable, so don't put your foot there. And no one goes like, well, who made you the
Right.
trail expert?
Right.
Right? No, you just go, oh, okay, yeah, like they're a few steps ahead of me. They know this thing that, might be helpful to avoid. And they put their foot here instead, and that was helpful for them. So I'm just going to do what they said. And to me, that's what coaching is. It's like, I don't think there should be, well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think people should obviously improve their skills when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to coaching. But like the ultimate qualification is really just having some sort of experience, right? Being able to turn around and say, hey, this is what worked for me and this is what didn't work for me. And maybe that would be helpful for you too, because we're on a similar path, right?
Right.
And what I will say, because this isn't about me, I want to stick with your story. But when you talked about your boyfriend having gone through like similar thing, to me, I really related to that because in my first marriage, I got married when I was 19 years old. And a year later, my wife at the time lost her brother, who was like literally just a few days younger than me. And then a month after that, her dad.
Mm.
And they died in a traumatic way. And I know that nobody's actually said this to me. I think it's more of a self-imposed thing, but I've thought in the past was like, well, it didn't happen to me, right? It wasn't my family. It's like, do I really even have a right to feel this way? But it's exactly true. Like I was there with her the whole time, and I went through it as well. And so, saying all that to say, I also went to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and the way I look at it, when you talked about like therapy and coaching, I love that you're like, okay, go to therapy, and then like therapy is for the past and coaching is for the future. And to me, that really makes sense. It's like therapy is almost like fixing the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and then coaching is like building on the foundation, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, you want to have an amazing life. That's great. But like the foundation needs to be fixed, right? Like
Yep.
you need something solid to build on. And if you can go to therapy, the cool thing is then the sky's the limit, right?
Yeah.
Like you can just keep building higher and higher and really have an amazing life. And so I do feel like there is a place for both of those things. And I do believe that when it comes to therapy, um, it can be this thing that's just like, hey, we just got to fix these cracks, and then the foundation is good, and you can kind of like, you can just move on and keep doing other things and live this amazing life. And
Right.
one of the things you said earlier was about being vulnerable. I remember when I went to therapy, it's kind of crazy. I still like periodically keep in touch with the therapist that I talked
Mm-hmm.
to, and just recently, because I told him like that was like a turning point in my life. And he goes, what's funny, I looked back, he goes, you literally came for like 7 sessions. Like, that's it. Like, you didn't come for like a crazy amount of time, blah, blah, blah. And I'm only saying that to say I went in there and I was just 100% open. Like, when you talk
Mm-hmm.
about vulnerability, I
Yeah.
didn't hold anything back. I said, I just like completely poured out everything and just put it all out there.
Mm-hmm.
And every time he said, do this exercise, do this thing, and we had conversations, I was just 100% open. And I do believe that that's part of the reason why I was able to move through it so quickly. I wasn't trying to like finish fast or anything, right?
Right.
I just had
Right.
opened myself up to it. But I'm sharing that because I think it's important for people maybe listening to hear that confirmation if they're curious, like, oh, but I don't know if I should be vulnerable. I don't know if I want to share these things. It's like, listen, that is actually like the key. Like, if you are able to be vulnerable and to be open when you go to therapy, it's like it can literally, like for me, it was 7 sessions. Like, we're talking like less than 2 months. And then it was like upward trajectory from there for the rest of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think that, as human beings, we have this like little thing in our brain that says if we say a certain thing, they're going to judge me on it.
Mm,
And if you have a therapist that has judgment, you walk out of that door.
you're
Like,
the
that
wrong
is
therapist.
not your place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, their job is to allow you and give you a safe space, which is, I feel, my superpower. I'm
Mm,
able to give people a safe space to be vulnerable with me
yeah.
so that I can kind of dive and figure out which way to go or
Sure.
where they're at, right? So some people will come to me and I'll just say, you know what? You have more to work on in your past.
Mm,
um, it will be hard for me to coach you moving forward if you haven't
mm.
dealt with that first. So I just put it out there. I'm totally honest about
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right?
I like that.
And because honestly, like I'd be doing them a disservice as a coach saying, okay, we're going to take you this way, but you haven't dealt with anything this way. And so you're going to hit roadblocks after roadblock after roadblock. So, I think it is very important. In vulnerability is the key. It is the absolute key. You're 100% right with that. I know it's scary. I know it's scary. Like, ha- looking across from another human being and just letting them see the full you. I'll give you a funny example with my book. So, someone asked me one day what it felt like to push the button go on my book for it to be out there. And I described it like this: I described it as being naked at rush hour, standing on the side of a major highway. And people are
Yeah.
like seeing all you. There's no hiding it, right? You are all out there. My book is it's not an easy read, but it's an important read because I address all of this.
Hmm.
But you can feel my vulnerability, you can feel my authenticity, you can, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to grab the hand of my reader and take them on this journey so that they can really dive in and understand that this is what it takes. And when you talk about having a wonderful life and all of this, part of it, I have one of my chapters is called Rose Colored Glasses because I walked around with them And when you do that, you can't see what's good and what's bad, as far as like what serves you and what doesn't. And so I was in relationships with people that were not serving me, and I was continuing in that relationship, and then we become people pleasers, right? And a lot of that comes from my narcissistic abuse part.
Mm.
But at the same token, that's all a part of not wanting to be your authentic self. And all have we should all be living our authentic self.
Oh yeah.
Um because it does hold us back from having the life that we've always dreamed of having the relationships that we crave and that we've always wanted, um, having the career that we've always wanted. But all these self doubt, self things, all stemming from whatever trauma or hurt that we've been through, are keeping us from having.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's an important part. And I think now too, right now in our environment now, there is so much fear and so uncertainty, and it is bringing up a lot of what I call shadows for people, all the pain and the traumas and
Mm.
and the triggers and all of that. And so more than ever now, I feel that it's super important for people to heal.
You know what's funny? I never really thought about it like that. That's a good point. So, um, like I've had a lot of conversations recently with people because I tend to, and I think this is actually most people,
Mm-hmm.
but I tend to fall like in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
politically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I I'm saying from experience of like having I shared this before in my podcast, but I've driven like rideshare for Uber and Lyft for more than a decade. Okay.
Me
So I've
too.
had like, oh really? Great, cool. So I mean you've probably talked to a lot of people then too. And
Mm-hmm.
I've essentially had a revolving door of people, in my car every day for the last, 10 years on and off, right? But and I found that like most people are like somewhere in the middle. Like that they
Yep.
don't really like lean towards these extremes. And anyway, I've been having these conversations lately because it seems like when you go on social media, all you're hearing is like all the way on one side or on the other. And you, some of the comments you read just feel like so hateful and like angry. And I never really looked at it like that because
Because there's
I,
something in you that it's triggering.
yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It's really interesting to see that and go, oh, just I'm saying it's interesting to
Yeah.
have read that and then you say this and I go, oh, that's a good point. Like we tend to look at things on the surface, right, and go, oh, it's about politics, and it's like, oh, maybe it's not, right? Maybe this is just like it's triggering some sort of trauma that these people have been through, and that's
Mm-hmm.
causing this visceral response. Man, that's so interesting.
Absolutely.
So
And this
interesting.
is, here's the thing. And this is just how I feel. But
Yeah.
if you zoom out, I think everybody pays attention to everything that is just happening all at once, all at once, all at
Yeah.
once, all at once, right? And that's what they want. That's what they want. So if you zoom out and you really pay attention to what's going on, then you know that this is not a left and a right issue.
Mm.
This is a top and a bottom issue, and it has been like this since the day of dawn, right? It's always been this way, right? We
Yeah.
have always been oppressed by the people who have had more.
Mm.
And I think the difference now is that people are waking up and understanding that,
Mm.
and they're seeing, oh my gosh, I have been oppressed.
Mm.
I have felt this way. And they're starting to say this is not the world that we want. We
Mm.
don't want this. We want everybody, we just want to go on with our lives. We just want to, we don't want to live in fear. We don't
Mm.
want to live with all of that. And I think a lot of it is that they feel at this point, when I say they, who I'm talking about, feel like if they bombard us, they know that it's going to trigger certain things,
Mm.
anger and whatever. But what they're seeing is that people, because I'm one of them, I show up in make my voice known in the streets, so to speak, um, for a reason, for other people, for people I've never met day in my life. I'm out there fighting for those people, the people that can't fight anymore or whatever. And I find that most people are like that,
Mm.
right? But we have been programmed a certain way through our lineage to feel a certain way, right? And I think that people are starting to wake up and go, wait a minute, that doesn't feel like it aligns with me anymore, you know? And so even with the people, you know, even with like Republicans, right? I have friends that are Republicans, and what I did was they stopped talking to me um, before, you know, the election and everything, and I was okay with that. I was like, you know what, they got to do with it what they need to do, whatever, right? Um, Everybody has their own opinions, right?
Hmm.
It's not my opinion, whatever. That's what makes us America. We can have different opinions. The
Yeah.
problem is
Yeah.
the programming. Okay. So when the programming has been a certain way, right? You feel like it's almost like an obligation to continue that lineage. And um and so but there's a reason behind that mindset, and especially when it comes to thinking of only yourself and thinking that, you know, because it's not happening to you, then you shouldn't be involved in it, or you shouldn't do anything about it, or you have no say in it, right? It's not your problem. Well, it becomes our problem. And so that's when people start to look at it and go, wait a minute, like, I didn't, this is, no, this is a human being problem, right? It's not a political problem. You said it. It is not. This is humanity. And we're getting to a point right now where we're like, this is not the world we want to live in. We don't want to live in fear. People don't want to wake up every morning and want to throw up because they pop on their social media or they turn on the news and it's bad, bad, worse, bad, bad, right? And so I think that it's really important, especially now, is and I loved, you know, Mr. Rogers, like he used to say, look for the helpers, look for the positive,
Mm.
pick out the positive things that are happening.
Yeah.
So for me, like when I see videos of protests that are going on all over the world, mind you, this isn't just a United States problem. This is happening all over the world. When I see people standing up and making their voices heard, that is beautiful. That is humanity. That is us standing up and going, nope, we've lived like this for too long and we're not going to live like this anymore. This is not what we want. And so when I'm standing in the middle of, you know, singing in the streets and all walks of life, all ages, from coming from everywhere, right? That maybe did lean far right. And now they're like, oh no, I don't align with that anymore, right? Beautiful. This is what human beings are. This is what humanity should be and feel like. The energy of being in the middle of that or even seeing that is incredible. Um,
Yeah. I have
Honestly,
a question for you.
yeah.
So when it comes to, so, okay. So one of the things you said to me was that you drive a lot of rideshare. Okay.
I drove for Lyft for a little while, yeah,
Okay. Okay. And,
which is where I met that woman.
oh, really? Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I'm interested in, and it's kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, but also in relation to your story and your experience
Mm-hmm.
growing up. Um, I'm wondering what your belief is on the default nature of people. So, especially because of what you've been through, but
Mm-hmm.
also in now going to therapy and healing and helping other people. I'm curious, what your perspective maybe was in the past, what it is now, how it's evolved, all those things.
Oh, it's definitely evolved.
Yeah.
um, I don't think I would have. I honestly, if I was the same person before my healing journey, if I was the same person now, I'd be curled up in a corner somewhere.
Hmm.
I don't know if I would even be here,
Sure.
honestly, to be
Yeah.
honest, because I would allow all of that stuff just pile up on me, pile up, pile up, pile up. I think that the reason, like I said, I think the reason that people are feeling overwhelmed, are feeling scared, are feeling all of these things is because there's something inside of them that's not healed. And all of this turmoil and all of this stuff is bringing that out. It is bringing it up, whether it was childhood trauma or whatever that has not been dealt with, and the
Mm,
insecurities and the things that go on with that. So there's so many unhealed people,
mm,
right?
yeah.
And all of this stuff that's going on is bringing that out in them.
Yeah.
And so if you look at it this way, the people that are standing, that are like, that are waking up, I keep saying they wake up and they realize this is not the world I want to live in a way, that's them starting to heal.
Mm,
That's them starting to see things differently, not
yeah.
allowing their trauma to cloud their thoughts and cloud who they are, who they
Yeah.
want to be,
Yeah.
right? And so we're seeing a lot of power in that.
Sure. So,
Um,
so let me get more specific.
sure.
The people that were involved in your father's murder,
Yes.
how do you view those people? Do you know their names? What do you know about them? What is your perspective on them? Like, how do you look at them?
Okay. So we can dive into that. So the main guy who actually killed my father, he laid in wait and killed him.
Okay.
Um, they
So it
found
wasn't
him.
a drive-by then.
No. Well, it was. Technically, it was a drive-by.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just
Technically,
was
it
trying
was.
to understand because I know you
It,
said drive-by earlier,
but
but
it was, like I said, it had been planned out. So
I
this was
see.
a
I
planned
see.
out
It wasn't
attack.
just like random. It was like the guy was
Mm-mm.
waiting. I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So, like I said, my story is very
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of components.
a
Totally.
lot of components. We would be here for 4 hours. So, um, I faced him in court when I was 18,
Oh
19,
wow.
almost
Okay.
19. Um, Very dark soul, very dark energy, and I faced him. And I always, I always had this feeling, they talk about the death penalty and all that. My reasoning behind the death penalty, I had told myself, even going through therapy, that if the day came and I needed to be present, right? The reason I needed to be present was because I wanted to look him in the face again and say, you didn't win. And I've had an amazing life. And you have not had a hold over me ever. I needed to say that to him. Now, I never got that chance. Um, they found him dead last year, April 29th. Um, they said he committed suicide 38 years later. Really? I don't know.
Mm,
But there is still one left in prison. The one that was paroled. Um, the thing you need to understand is when someone is got like 25 years to life, they do have these parole hearings. And so when you're in the middle of healing, like I was, like, um, every 3 to 5 years having to have that, you're making progress, and then you have that come up and it
yeah.
kind of moves you backwards again. I got to a point where I was like, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to be okay with it. Right. And so when he was paroled, there was a sense of, um, I felt like this was the time that I can continue to heal and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, and at that point, that's where the book started to pop into my head even
Yeah.
more. uh, prevalent. And then, like I said, there's still one that's still in prison, and because he got life imprisonment without parole, so
Yeah.
he's still in prison. Um, but I have never. I've had bouts in my life where I felt like a victim, but most of the time I felt like a survivor. I hate the victim mentality within myself, and I see it in my mother. Um, and my brother is starting to come into the survivorship
Mm,
mentality. He's on his journey and he's doing well. He's doing good, and I'm very proud of him. Um, but yeah, I mean, when it comes to those men, yes, in the beginning there was hatred. There was, all the things that you would think.
yeah.
Going to
Yeah.
the trial, hearing the stuff, not being able to get away. We had two trials, by the way.
Mm,
It was all over the radio, all over the news, all over everything, all the time. And it was overwhelming as a young lady, and I was young. I was 19 years old, and that was all going on. And I just wanted to get on with my life.
yeah.
But I was not able to because, it was just in front of me all the time. So there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of sadness around the fact that my dad was never able to be with me in like very significant times.
Yeah.
My wedding day with my husband um, was hard. I was very conflicted that day because part of me was joyous. I was marrying the man of my life, and the other side was I wasn't being walked down by, you know, my dad and the person that I loved the most. And so it was difficult. But, um, now, now I look at it, I feel like I'm very proud of myself of the fact that I didn't hold on to that victim mentality, and
Hmm.
that I was able to move in and move on to the survivor mentality, because I feel like in that moment I took my power back.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I think so. I just kind of want to dig a little deeper. Sorry, if you don't
dive,
mind.
dive.
Um, Earlier when we were talking about the political stuff, one of the
Yes,
things you mentioned was, people having these visceral reactions. A lot of people walking around unhealed. Is that the perspective that you have also of the people that participated in what happened when you were younger?
absolutely. My mom would smack me upside my head because she's in the victim mentality.
Okay.
So again, I can zoom out and I can see that. Um, Here's what I know. We're all put on this earth, right? And we do have lessons that we're supposed to learn here. This is just my this is just my opinion,
Okay.
but um, we all have things that we're supposed to learn here on earth, right, before we depart. And there are certain people that don't learn it while they're here. Um, I feel like none of them ever took responsibility for what they did.
Okay.
Um, and I found forgiveness, right? And it wasn't for their benefit. It was definitely for my benefit.
Sure.
But when I talk about forgiveness, I know it makes people like get a little uncomfortable, but the reason I talk about it is because I turn it around, and I turned it around by thinking, when I find forgiveness, what I'm doing is I'm taking my power back. I'm no longer allowing whatever happened to hurt me anymore, to define me anymore, right? And so that's huge for people to look at it that way. you're not saying it was okay what they did, because it's not, right? Um, but I think whatever happened in his life, or even in other life, I don't know, uh, had a lot to do with what he did here on Earth.
Mm.
And I was in the belief that once he left this earth, that's when he was going to deal with what he did when he was on this earth. So
Mm.
I found peace in that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to find forgiveness for people who you will never hear their remorse.
Yeah.
You just have to do it, because again, it's not for them, it's for you.
Yeah. I Part of the reason why I'm digging a little bit on this subject is because it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I talk about it a lot on this podcast. Is about like the default nature of people,
Mm-hmm.
and I like to hear the perspective of people who have been, through something that maybe might call that into question. I feel like hearing other people's perspectives, especially people that might disagree with you, is really important. And I say all this because my philosophy is that the default nature of people is goodness. Like I believe that at the core, people are good.
Yeah.
And this is not just coming from experience with Uber, okay, like in having passengers and talking to them, but
Yeah.
also like just witnessing people in my life and my own experience do some pretty bad stuff. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
pretty that some people
It's
would
called
describe
free
as evil.
will.
Yeah, but people would describe it as evil, right?
Uh-huh.
And even still, with those people, um, like I do believe that deep down they were good, and I, I can't explain totally why they ended up doing what they did,
Mm-hmm.
but I always say this, like if you rewind far back enough on anybody, at some point they were just an innocent little baby that was not evil in any way, that was good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, well, if you go through, just the right combination of things, you just turn out to be a murderer. Like, I'm not saying that, right? Like, for example, for you, it's like you went through what you went through. Like, you could have ended up a very different person.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is some responsibility to be taken. And so I
Yep.
don't just like, say, oh, okay, they're not accountable because, they went through some stuff. And so therefore they're, now do these bad things and it's okay. No, like I do think there is responsibility that needs to be taken, but also I do feel like kind of what you mentioned in line with the idea of forgiving people, that I do think there is there is like a real like power that comes back to you when you give people that, like, because it really is a gift. Like if you can look at every single person and be like, I know that deep down like you're good and I forgive you for all these things, like whatever it might be that I might view as you doing bad thing or just let's say objectively evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you I think if someone doesn't believe that, if they don't believe that like everyone is good, right? I think most people believe like, oh, most people are good, but there's some people who are just bad. But if you really do believe that everyone is good, it's kind of it's hard to explain, but like there's this freedom that you all of a sudden have in like every interaction, every person that you talk to, that is very similar to what you described about like just in a specific instance forgiving someone. But if you look at the all of humanity in that way, it's that same power, but now with every single person you
Yeah.
come into contact with. So anyway, saying all this to say, it's really interesting to hear your perspective on it. And it seemed like when I said that I believe the default nature of
I
people is
have a
good.
spiritual perspective on it
Sure,
too, but I don't
sure.
really get into it too much because people get a little weirded out. But
Well, I would love to hear it, but
uh,
so hold on, just
yeah,
before, but
like
you
I
don't want to share
said,
that.
4 hours.
Oh yeah, good point. We're already at an hour and 15 minutes here. No, that's okay. That's okay. But just because when I was saying that, I want to know because I want clarity on your experience. When I was saying that I believe the default nature of people is good,
Mhm.
you were like smiling and nodding. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, like I said, part of this is my spirituality. I don't
Okay.
know, but this is my opinion is that, uh You're probably gonna think I'm nuts,
No,
but
no, please share
I
share
I
it.
I feel like, there are certain people that have lived many lives.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are certain people that are incarnated,
Mm-hmm.
right? They choose to come here. Like I said, when I talked about earlier about people having lessons to learn,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we hear the word karma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like when there are certain people that incarnate that have come from other lives where something has happened, so it changes their new human suit,
Who they
right?
arrive as is what you're saying.
When they arrive,
Interesting.
they're they're dealing with that karma from another life, right?
Mm,
They've incarnated
mm.
into this life. So I know it sounds crazy. People might think I'm nuts, but uh, hi, this is what happens when you heal.
Sure. Sure.
um, like things become a lot more deeper, but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like when I look at things like that, I feel like um, the choices that are made, right, are it's all free will. It's all free will, right? Nobody has any control over someone else's choices. The guy who killed my dad made a choice. He
Mm-hmm.
made a choice to do
Mm-hmm.
what he did because he felt like he was um, that it was his right. I
Yeah.
mean, he literally did. He felt like it was his right to take my dad out so
Yeah.
that he could continue to live his life
Yeah.
and on the street, like free.
Yeah.
And that was his belief system, right? And so we can get into belief systems, and it's again, it's a part of um, it's all a part of the learning of the lessons,
Yeah.
the awareness
Yeah.
of of um, human beings as a whole, and that's why I say, and that's why I said it earlier, is that it's so important for us to heal, because when you do, it's a piece of that healing helps heal the karma you've had
Mm.
in another life, or
Sure.
you know what I
Sure.
mean. And
Yeah.
so um
So
it's
just so you
even
know,
more
I don't think you're
beautiful.
crazy.
Oh,
I don't
I'm
think
so
you're crazy.
glad.
I do. This is. So I was raised really religious, and I'm not anymore.
Me
But
too.
but because of that, I was raised in a way where it's like this is the truth. End of story.
Yep.
And now that I've moved away from that, I'm definitely I can understand how everyone's trying to just figure out what life is, right? And I
Absolutely.
think like whatever anyone chooses to believe is like 100% okay. And it
That's right.
also 100% a possibility, right? Like I'm not saying
Right.
it's true, but it's like, yeah, maybe that is what's going on. I don't know.
Right.
Right. Okay. So
That's
I
why
had
I
a,
say this is just my
yeah,
thoughts, my
absolutely.
you
Absolutely. Okay. So
know.
I wanted to clarify something. So the man who actually pulled the trigger,
Mhm.
um, was he the one who was going to go to prison if your dad testified? Is that what was the
Yes.
situation was? Okay. And so he was like, I don't want to go to prison. I would rather,
Yes.
take him out. But then ironically, he gets caught for doing that and goes to prison anyway. Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So sorry.
It's
So
okay. It's a
do you,
lot.
do you believe that he is a bad person?
Um, I believe that he had a bad soul. I believe his energy was dark.
Interesting.
Uh, and like I said, people incarnate here in our energy. We are
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
We are energy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And some people just, they do. They have dark energy, and it comes from whatever they had in the past a lot of times, and it comes back. And so, for instance, when I say dark energy, it's even at 17 years old, before I even knew about any of that stuff,
Yeah.
just looking at his eyes, there was nothing there.
Interesting.
Nothing. Like nothing. And he just felt dark. And it wasn't just like, yeah, this is the man that killed my dad and I hate him kind of thing. It was, I felt like there was something hollow about him. There was just,
Mm,
there was uh, no love in there,
mm,
no anything. So whatever happened to him deadened him, literally.
interesting.
It
Yeah,
deadened him.
it makes me curious to know because like I said, everyone's got their own perspective, right? But I'm curious about this person. It was like, what was, and I'm not saying in a traumatic way, I'm saying in an everyday way.
Yeah,
What was his childhood like? Like,
right,
did he have a good relationship with his siblings? Did he play tag?
right.
And then when he was older, did he have a spouse and did he have kids that he loved and like all of those things? Because it's like it's easy for us to look at obviously a crazy, terrible, awful thing that he
Mm-hmm.
did and be like, okay, that person is bad, right? But then I'm like, well, I wonder if I could be a fly on the wall in this person's life and like what was his everyday life? You're just like, oh damn, that's a bad guy. Like, look at him, he's just like robbing people and punching people and like abusing his
Yeah,
kids, right? And like it makes you wonder, like,
yeah,
or was it, this situation where it's like, okay, in his normal life, he seems like a normal guy, but then he does this like, bad act or something like that. I don't know, but that's what I'm curious. I just, it's like the thoughts that go through my head.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I got to know a little bit about his background
Yeah.
just because of uh his hearings and things
Yeah.
like that. But he grew up fatherless, and I
Mm,
know that has a lot to do with it. But that has some issue for
sure.
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 Um, but his mentality was whatever happened. What his mentality was, he wanted flash cash. He wanted to be the big wig. He
Mm,
wanted people to look up to him. He was a walking narcissist, let me tell
mm,
you. Like sociopathic. I'm not a therapist, but I can tell you that he had no remorse for anything that he did. He didn't care as long
interesting.
as it gave him power. Who does that sound like? I don't know. But as long as he got the power and he had the money and all of that, so it was just like, okay. When I looked at it, and I actually just recently thought about that too. I'm like, wow, that was like a stark reminder for me, right? Like of what we're dealing with right now,
Mm,
presently. This is a man who grew up void of a father or a father figure or anyone that could move him in a more positive direction. I don't know what his relationship with his mother was. I know that he had children that he really didn't have relationships with. Um, and one of them got into trouble and ended up passing away because of it. Um, but he didn't, he thrived on having little people behind him and the power and having the money and the women and the flash and the cash and all of these things. And the people he's surrounded with who are out of jail now and
mm-hmm,
sitting in jail presently
mm,
uh, wanted that, and so they were
mm.
willing to do whatever it was to impress him. Do you see where there's
Yeah.
some
Interesting.
parallels? There's some parallels going on right now. So it was just it was that's exactly what it was. It was just like he didn't care. He didn't care that my dad had a family. He
Yeah.
didn't care that he was married. He didn't care that he had children. In fact, we at one point were a target.
Yeah.
He was like, take them all out. I don't care. And he tried to hire another person to do it.
Wow.
And apparently, hitmen have morals or values or something. And they said, I'm sorry, I'm not killing children, not doing it.
Wow.
And so they refused, which pissed him off. And that's why he chose to do it himself.
Mm.
Um, so, when I'm talking about that person, like I said, his energy was dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were no light in his eyes. I
Yeah.
could not look at him and think, oh, I know somewhere in there's a good person. Because
Interesting.
I think that good person was gone. Like,
Yeah.
that part of him was gone, and that's where you
Mm.
felt the dark energy of him. And are
Yeah.
there people that walk around this earth like that? Yes.
Yeah.
Where they have taken that piece of them that was good and they have thrown it out the window. They
Yeah.
have pushed it away. They have made it die.
Do you think that, because so I understand your perspective on it, right, especially in that moment you're like there's no good there. I'm curious, do you, because I know what you said about like arriving with certain karmic debt or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
um do you believe that when he did come to earth that he was good and that eventually that good went away, or do you believe that he came to earth the way that you witnessed him as
He
bad?
could have come to Earth as a child and I mean, um, it's hard to say. It's hard to
Yeah.
say.
Sorry.
I
I'm
mean,
so the
as a
real
kid, he could
question.
have absolutely, and whatever happened to him hardened him
Yeah. Yeah.
to the
So the
point
real,
that
like the
he made
actual
that bad call.
question. Oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. The actual question that I'm asking is essentially about the nature of all people, right? So I'm curious if it's like,
Oh
okay,
yeah,
yes, like no, some people just come here and
yeah,
they're
for
bad,
sure.
or it's like no, everybody comes good, and maybe there's some people who end up that way. That's why I'm asking, really, like,
I
and
feel
specifically him
like
because it applies to you.
initially, yes, I feel like we come here. Most
Okay.
people are
Interesting.
good. Yes, I believe most people are good, and then whatever the programming is,
Sure.
whatever
Oh man, so
the
many different
so many
factors. Yeah,
different
I
things,
totally, totally.
the trauma, whatever it
Yeah,
is, right, can
yeah,
harden someone and make them make choices that are karmically not good ones.
sure, sure.
And so, no, I believe that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example with my own husband, right?
Okay.
Um, there was infidelity in our relationship.
Mm,
And because I walked around in rose colored glasses, and everybody kept saying, "Oh, you guys are like Ken and Barbie, perfect little couple," that kind of thing. That was another identity that I wore. I'm like,
mm,
"Oh, we're the perfect little couple." No, we weren't, because
mm,
he was having feelings of like, I've been through so much, and I want something different. There's something different out there for me. I want a different life, right? And so he was looking for that. He was
mm,
looking for that in other women. And you know it now I can see it. Obviously, when I found out about his infidelity, I was angry, I was hurt. He was the one person in my life that I thought could never hurt me to that
mm,
extreme, and he did. And on the other side of that, I knew that even though he was doing these things, deep down in there was a beautiful human being with a
mm.
huge heart. I
Yeah,
knew it,
yeah.
right? And so for me, it was like there was this fight, because for me, I was just like, I wish you could see it. Like, if you could just see that part of
Mm,
yourself, then you wouldn't have to self sabotage yourself. You wouldn't, destroy your family. You wouldn't do all of these things. And so but I didn't know how to verbalize that to him without sounding like I was trying to control him,
mm,
right? So when I did find out about the infidelity, the thing that I did was divorce him. I thought, okay, clearly he's not committed anymore. And he was with someone else at the time, for a very short amount of time, that produced a child. But he's mine. He's mine. Um, he, and so our breakup was very short,
Mm,
very short. Because once everything was out on the table, you talk about foundation. That foundation was there. And so we just rebuilt on it. Do we have things that take us back to that feeling or that frustration or whatever? Yes, 100%.
yeah.
Um, Communication is key, right? And, you know,
Isn't it crazy how just being, see, this is the part that's nuts. Like in just observing the story you related, is that had he been open about it beforehand, it probably never would have happened. And what actually solved the problem was later, because he was forced to be open about it because of what happened.
right.
Then it was solved. It's crazy. It's because I'm bringing that up because what you mentioned before about vulnerability and being open, and
Oh,
it's just
yeah.
like it's kind of nuts. And I can't just say like a blanket statement, but it feels like that's almost all that's necessary, is like just being open and like shit, like being vulnerable with the people in your life that are close to you.
Yep.
And when you do that, you know how I think of it is almost like if you picture two like fish tanks, and like one of them is like the water's up here and the other one's down there. And when you're open, it's like you just remove the wall in between and then it all levels out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we still work on that today. And
Sure.
we've been together almost 40 years. So it's just, I know we were like, roommates in the hospital. I know you think that, but that's always like, what? 40, huh? Uh, because I never want to say my real age.
I know. I was
Um,
doing the math while we were talking. I was like, really? Interesting. No, yeah.
right. Yeah.
It's a
Like,
compliment, obviously.
yeah, yeah. But it's always been a running joke. But
So
yeah,
I,
I
I
mean,
wanted to clarify something and clear it up because
yeah,
when I was asking earlier about the nature, whatever,
yes,
I was not trying to like push a specific answer. I just am
no,
genuinely curious,
yeah,
especially when someone has been through what you've been through, to be like,
right.
but what do you really think? Like, do you feel this way? Right. And it's interesting because, in a lot of situations, not all, but in a
Hmm.
lot of cases, when I've talked to somebody who's been through something traumatic, super,
Yeah.
super traumatic, and it feels like they've gotten to the point where they've grown, right? Like they've
Hmm.
gone to therapy and done coaching and stuff. Once they get to that point, it does feel like that is the perspective, is
Yeah.
that people come here good,
Yeah.
whether regardless of whatever you might believe happened beforehand, that when they arrive here, they're good. When
Right.
they arrive in
Yep.
the world, they're good. And that's, so like I said, I wasn't trying to push that answer, but I'm trying to
No,
push to get an
I get
answer. That's
it.
what I really wanted, is because
Yeah,
even if
I
the answer
get
is
it.
no, that's okay. I just wanted to know. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, I believe that people are good innately. I do, but whatever it is, that
Yeah.
changes them,
Yeah. You know, there's
and
this
just
book
being
I read.
human,
What was that?
just being human.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so along the same lines, there's this book I read. It's called No Bad Parts. I think, to be totally transparent, I didn't finish it, but I started reading it, and it was super interesting because essentially what they were saying in this book was similar to like this like thought process that I've had, that like deep down people are good, and that essentially every person has like all of these parts to them,
Hmm.
and that in their experience as a therapist, this person essentially has said is that there is nobody who is committed. And so, okay, let me see if I want to make sure I say this right. There's nobody that they have worked with that has done something so bad that they weren't able to help them with the type of therapy that they're talking about. And ultimately, the what they're describing about like everyone having these different parts is almost like these like separate personalities within that operate within us. And
Hmm.
that these people who have done like heinous things, right, from murder to child abuse, things like that, that
Mhm.
it ultimately has come down to like there's this part of them that is inside of them that was hurt and that ultimately is acting in a way that it thinks is best to
Mhm.
protect the person based
Yeah.
on that experience. And that's why they're doing that thing.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that that's ultimate truth, but I'm just saying that's what they said in this book. And that was something that was really fascinating to me. And I think it's kind of an interesting explanation for
Yeah.
maybe if someone comes into the world good, why they might end up the way that they are. And a lot of times, I mean, you find someone who, I mean, I guess I can't say with certainty, right? But my assumption is that if somebody does something, some sort of heinous act, some terrible thing, or they do, bad things regularly,
Mhm.
you can look back and like none of them had just like a pleasant childhood, right? Like a
Right.
good life and nothing bad ever happened to them. It's like, no,
Right.
they all had something bad happen to them.
There
In
was
which case
always something.
you're
Yeah.
like, well, that's interesting then. So I do believe that there's responsibility to be taken after something bad happens and how
Mhm.
you're going to, move forward from it. But also to know that like it's always been that something traumatic happened to them that influenced them in that direction. It's like, well, that can't be ignored either. It's like maybe this is something that I mean, of course, you're saying it yourself, right? Like if you've been through something traumatic, you got to go to therapy. But that's really, yeah, anyway, I thought it was kind of an
Well,
interesting
and
perspective.
that's it. Like if you were talking about puzzle pieces, like we are a puzzle, right? And
Yeah.
so if you're missing a piece of your puzzle, how can you be a whole person? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So, um, and there's a lot of people walking around with missing puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people right now that are finding those puzzle pieces and putting them into place.
Sure.
And so I feel like it's really important that, yeah, I mean, innately, yes, we come to Earth, we are good people, right? And there is free will and there are choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are those person's choices because that was their lesson to learn.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So, even things that are happening right now, people are learning lessons that it was their lesson to learn, nobody else's lessons to learn, right? So, when I look at today's situation through this filter, I can recognize what are the lessons I need to learn from it,
Mm.
and when you're healing, and I'm not a healed person, I am a healing person because it's an ongoing thing. I tell people all the time, just because I wrote a book does not mean that it's done. Like you're going to evolve until you're no longer on this earth, right? You're going to continue to heal from things. And like I said, I didn't even realize that I had a narcissistic mother, um, until I started rereading my book during the process of the editing, because I was
Mm.
like, oh my God, this relationship has always been toxic. I just
Interesting.
didn't see that.
Yeah.
And same with my brother. My brother, when he and I talked, we were like, wait a minute. It was a big eye-opening experience for me, and realizing that a lot of my behaviors, a lot of my triggers, a lot of my things that happen with me, especially with my husband, if he says a certain thing or
Mm.
whatever,
Yeah.
it may not be super hurtful,
Yeah.
but maybe I heard it before, or maybe
Mm.
I heard something similar to it, and then it
Yeah.
triggers this feeling in me.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that that is coming from and stemming from the abuse that I dealt with, um, my whole life with
Yeah.
her. And we are no contact right now.
Oh,
She read the book and uh, was not happy that I was totally authentic and 100% real.
interesting.
Um, because in telling my truth, I had to tell some of hers.
Yep.
And
Yep.
she decided she no longer wanted a relationship with me. And
Wow.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
I that was a definite. And honestly, in looking, I'm peaceful about it. I really am. Um, I'm okay with it. You know, um, just because they are our blood family does not mean that we can continue to allow them to abuse us. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it was hard. It was not easy, because I lived in obligation land, and I thought, I am the oldest daughter. It is my responsibility to help my mom heal. And, I know that one day, and this is what my brother deals with as well.
Mm-hmm.
One day she's going to wake up and see the ways of,
Mm-hmm.
her ways. And
The error
she's
of
going
her
to
ways. Yeah.
see, she's going to be, she's going to understand us and where we're coming from. And she's going to be this Hallmark holiday mom, you know, and it's not going to happen, right? And I had to make that realization. But if I hadn't done the healing that I did, if I didn't do the work that I did, I would have never been able to walk away from this relationship. I would have bent and did whatever it took to make sure that she was in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And because I am on this healing journey, and I have done the work, I've realized that that relationship is not something that is healthy for me.
Mm-hmm.
It is not healthy for my husband either.
Mm-hmm.
He too dealt with all of the narcissistic abuse.
Sure.
It affected him. It affected my children. And so, I wanted to make sure to stop that lineage. I needed to stop that from moving forward.
Yeah.
And the only way that I was going to do it is to take what the universe gave me, which is her saying, full stop, don't want to have a relationship with my daughter anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and move on with my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I'll say is that, you said this earlier about writing your book and how like it helped you work through things, but also that it's helpful for other people. And I think, it's really so true. Like that's part of, it's funny. I share a lot about my life, and I honestly brag about my life. I'm like, my life is awesome. My relationship with my wife is awesome. And it's funny because obviously I was not raised to be that way. But I share it now, not just to brag, but because I want people to know what's possible. And I think in you sharing your story, it's not just like, hey, listen to this traumatic story. What it is like, hey, I went through something traumatic, and now like in reading someone else's story, it's like it can help me process what I went through. It can help me to see parallels and maybe places where I can learn and grow. And yeah, I think it's awesome. And so thank you for, writing your book and for coming on the show. If someone wants to read your book, where can they get it?
It's on Amazon.
Okay. And the title again?
The Other Side of the Gun, My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency.
By Susan Snow.
Yes.
Susan, I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything again. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for writing the book. And if anyone wants to connect with you, besides getting the book, do you have like a website?
I do. It's susansnowspeaks.com.
Amazing. Amazing. Susan, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For everything I have to offer, visit howtobeaperson.co.